When I was 1 year old, I picked a little wife. My mom didn't believe. She took me back to the start and told me to stay away from her friends, but who knew the little girl would crawl toward me on her. She grabbed my cheeks and started. Both moms saw this surprising scene and decisively arranged a childhood engagement for. When we were young, my childhood friend tricked. She said she was my future wife, and my money was her money. Then she emptied my little savings box. Until middle school, her family moved abroad. That's when the childhood engagement ended. One day, I just arrived at school. My deskmate Lu Yu leaned over and said, "I heard our class is getting a transfer student from abroad, too." I responded nonchalant, "It's not like I haven't seen foreign. Why make a big deal about it?" After saying that, I laid down on. In the afternoon, I had just entered the class. Lu Yu started gossiping again. "You're fine. Let me tell you, remember the transfer student I told you about this morning? They've already arrived at school. They're at the administration office. The class representative from the next class and got smitten by the transfer student. They even secretly took a photo with it, but they got caught by the discipline teacher. Their phone was confiscated. They're still being scolded now." "What? Who dares to take out their phone in the How attractive could they be?" Lu Yu got even more excited. "Unbelievably. All right, I just borrowed the class monitors. Do you want to see? I can borrow it again for you." I shook my head. Forget it. Since they're in our class, I'll see them eventually." The first period was Chinese, but all the school teachers were occupied. It seemed even our homeroom teacher, Lao Chin. So this period was changed to self. As the class representative, I was called to the with recording scores. My classmates kept reminding me to make sure to get a good look at the transfer student. They said, "I want a 1,000-word essay. Just good luck, class rep. Hurry up, class rep. By the way, help me check my score too." I nodded and agreed. Holding a pen and notebook, I headed to the office. Was crowded with teachers and everyone was grading I glanced around briefly. All I saw were familiar classrooms. Not a single unfamiliar face, and certainly no one outrageously beautiful. I figured I had no fate with this transfer, so I put them out of my mind. Then I joined the paper sorting team. Grading was done by the teachers. Class reps mainly helped pick out their class's paper. I saw some familiar names and quietly noted their scores, but I wasn't lucky. I searched through the whole. I didn't find a single paper. Instead, I found over 10 papers. Without exception, the scores were all very low. No wonder Lao Chin was so mad. At that moment, I overheard that kid from abroad. I heard their foreign language. Yes, I saw their previous report card. Their other subjects are also out. How did such a genius? And I realized they were talking about the transfer student. I felt a bit uneasy. This transfer student, but also a top academic achiever. I had only heard about their extraordinary. I didn't expect them to also be a super. A few students nearby overheard. They started whispering excitedly. Incredible. Our school actually got such a legendary figure. I had a feeling that class 3 from would have a line of boys peeking through the windows, trying to catch a glimpse. One of the class reps I knew nudged my arm and taught me a money-making trick. Lock your class windows and door. Close the curtains to anyone who wants to see the transfer student. 5 yuan per minute. You'll be rich in no time. Another boy laughed foolishly and said, 5 yuan for their face? That's too. 10 yuan for 1 minute. I'd even pay 1,000 yuan to touch them. I was astonished by just how attractive could they be? The boy nodded obsessively and said, truly, from their hair to their shoes. They're beautiful beyond. I was about to say something when the teachers, not wanting to delay the next, clapped their hands and told us we could. So I grabbed my notebook and rushed back to class to report the midterm results to my. As I reached the third floor stair, I saw the hallway was crowded, and it was almost all boys. I guess the transfer student had arrived in class. I looked around, but didn't see any blonde, blue-eyed. I couldn't help but feel puzzled. Then, under the envious gazes of the student, I walked into the noisy classroom. As I entered, a few enthusiastic classmates asked each, how did our class do? Since the classroom was surrounded by, I felt embarrassed to tell the truth. So I coughed lightly and handed over my score notebook, letting them pass it around to. My seat was in the second to last row. As I got closer, I realized my desk. Instead, there was a girl sitting there. She was wearing a blue jacket and a baseball cap. Her head was lowered, and the brim of her cap covered. I could only see her elegantly. All I could see was her elegantly curved and her pale, smooth skin. The girl was holding a paper and reading it intently. She looked like she was attending a parent. I thought maybe Lu had been called in, so I stopped and hesitated for a moment, looking around to find someone to ask about it. But then I realized everyone inside and outside, the envious looks were overwhelming. I felt even more confused. Then I saw Lu Yu sitting in the very last row. He was staring at me with a mix of excitement, wildly mouthing something, but his expressions were so exaggerated that I couldn't understand. At that, the girl sitting in my deskmate's seat suddenly looked up. She gazed at me with a curious look and asked. When I saw her face, I immediately understood what Lu Yu was. Transfer student, but wasn't the transfer student supposed to be a blonde, blue-eyed? I widened my eyes and accidentally blurting out my thoughts. But with so many people watching, I quickly turned to a nearby classmate to change the. Did we switch seats? Liu Yu, sitting in the back row, stood and hurriedly replied, "No, class rep. Your seat hasn't changed. It's still in the same spot." Then he quickly sat back down, leaving me awkwardly standing. The transfer student, sensing the strange act, seemed to understand. She straightened her posture, scooting her chair, making space for me to sit down. Then she looked up at me and said, "That's right. My desk mate is the Chinese class rep." The words "my desk mate" seemed to carry extra. When I heard her say "my desk mate," I suddenly understood Mr. Chin's decision to pair the transfer student with the Chinese class rep. It was probably because the transfer student that they weren't fully comfortable with man, so he always speaks slowly. I responded with a thank you. Through the gap he made, I got to my seat and sat down. Just then, the class bell rang. The boys peeking through the window, reluctant. Inside the class, the students also quieted down. Everyone began preparing their thing. A strange silence fell but many people were still glancing this. At that, the transfer student softly said a number. 64. I heard it. I instinctively felt it was directed at me. Following his gaze, my eyes landed on the test paper. It was the English monthly exam paper. I quickly straightened up and pulled the paper. Looking at the harsh comments on it, I protested softly. Then I glanced at the name next to the score. It was my paper. Before I could feel sad, I suddenly remembered that Liu Yu said he scored less than half. That means he didn't even get 32 points. The transfer student seemed to glance at me, but I didn't notice. Under the shock of the score, I quickly focused on studying. This happened to be an English class. I listened very attentively. The English teacher was explaining reading It was a story about a foreign student. Halfway through, he suddenly stopped. Facing my direction, he said, "I heard we have a new transfer student. Could this student translate this article for us?" The classmates finally had to openly look in our direction. I also looked over. On the transfer student's desk, there was only a very new English textbook. I glanced at it again and noticed it was the first. I pushed my test paper to the middle of the shared desk. The transfer student tilted his face slightly. His gaze was no longer as indifferent. His pupils reflected the fragmented sun like a piece of translucent glass. For a brief second I was once again struck by his stunning. It was then I noticed the transfer student had taken off his even every strand of his hair seemed The transfer student moved the test paper to the center, stood up, and lowered his. He translated the reading comprehension passage effortlessly and flawlessly. The English teacher led the applause after hearing his clearly very pleased with this new student. The classmates also gave an enthusiastic round, clearly impressed by the new student. Satisfied, the class ended quickly. Even after class, my test paper the transfer student leaned back in his. I wasn't sure if he looked at but I keenly noticed that the transfer student stole glances. But how was that? I felt like I caught him every time. I started overthinking and being narcissistic. So after class, I dropped my pen and ran. I didn't see Liu Yu when I passed by but as soon as I left, I saw Liu Yu waiting for me at the door. He dragged me to a quiet corner. Before he could bombard me with questions, I interrupted him. "I've seen that transfer student." Sure enough, Liu Yu froze in astonishment. I recounted the morning encounter, including how I accidentally knocked him over. Liu Yu's eyes sparkled. "What a coincidence. This is just too perfect." "Jiang Yichen, are you on some kind of lucky streak? Not only do you get to sit next to a beauty, but you even have such an incredible..." I scratched my head. "Beautiful, yes, but also troublesome." "Well, you wouldn't understand. I felt the transfer student was looking at me throughout. And during the collision it seemed like the transfer student, thinking about it, made me feel like Liu Yu smiled and patted me on the How could I not understand? Happiness came too suddenly. I didn't know how to face this beautiful girl I glared at him and said, "Shut up." We chatted until it was almost time for class. As soon as I saw my seat surrounded again. To be precise, the transfer student was. I noticed a black phone placed on top of my test. The screen displayed a QR code. Several boys from other classes stood next to him, holding up their phone. It seemed like they were scanning some boys standing on the outside. The transfer thoughtfully raised his phone for them. Liu Yu's expression suddenly became colorful. He leaned over and said to me, "I know people, but the transfer student looks so cold and aloof." I didn't expect him to be. I didn't say anything, just silently nodded. After observing for a while, Liu Yu patted me on the shoulder. "You're right. Beautiful is but indeed troublesome." Sure enough, you can't have both. Soon the class bell rang and the boys left excitedly. I calmly returned to my seat. The transfer student reached out to put away reached out to put away my English. At that moment, both of our hands appeared on the desk at the same. Under the sunlight, the small red moles on our wrist. Seeing the small red dot, I was instantly. The transfer student didn't seem to notice. He naturally asked, "What's the next class?" I suddenly looked, examining it carefully. After being stared at for a while and turned to look at me, I stammered, "Language class." "How's your math?" The transfer student. I was stunned, then nodded. "It's okay." The transfer student smiled slightly. "So, Have you decided? I didn't know. I suddenly choked up, not knowing how to answer. Nor did I want to answer. Right now, I just wanted to figure out. Seeing the small red mole on both our wrists, I realized this transfer looked so much the childhood nightmare of my next door neighbor. He also had a small. Because of that, when we were kids, we were a golden boy and jade girl pair. I asked, "Can I ask your name?" Even though the truth was right in front of me, I still didn't want to believe it. The transfer student raised his eyebrows, just about to answer. When the classroom door, old Chin walked in, holding a stack of class representative, so I didn't get an answer. I stood up dreamily, walking to the podium in a daze to distribute. Old Chin always liked to announce score to stimulate everyone's motivation. This time was no different. He called out names, and whoever's name was called, at the end, only 2 papers were left. Zhang Yichen 125. The classroom was filled with a soft buzz of discussion. Zhang Yichen is the highest in the class, maybe even the highest in the school this time. After all, the test this time was the class rep is just too strong, even higher than last time. Actually, I wasn't the highest, because underneath my paper, there was a high-scoring paper with 100. The name wasn't from our. I thought it was a grading miss, but on closer, I found that the paper only had a name on it, with no class or student. It must have been a teacher. Otherwise, not filling in the information. I put the paper down, but old Chin, who was standing beside me, said, so I froze for him. Old Chin said, Su Qingro, 137. The classroom erupted in. Who is that? Not from our class, right? Does anyone know? No one knows. Suddenly, someone seemed. They got excited, grabbing people around them to whisper. After all the papers were called, I was about to return to my when I saw my transfer student desk slowly straightening, then standing and walking toward me. His familiar features made me stare blankly at him. Su Qingro took the paper from my dazed hands. When he saw my expression, his thin lips curved slightly, revealing a faint smile. Old Chin seemed very pleased. Now let's have the new student introduce themselves. Su Qingro gave a polite smile to the class. Hello, my name is Su Qingro. I graduated from Homerton College in the UK. I hope we can all help each other in the future. Hearing this name, I seem to remember something. Su Qingro added with a meaningful tone, I am of Chinese nationality. Hearing this, I froze again. Old Chin passionately led the applause. Doesn't it feel great to return to your homeland? Su Qingro nodded slightly, politely replying, of course, home. My heart felt a mix of emotions, and I wandered back to my seat in a daze. As I sat down, I saw Su Qingro went back again. He retrieved the test paper I had forgotten. This childhood friend seemed so different from my memory. He had truly matured a lot. When the 3 of us stood on the podium, he seemed like an adult, chatting effortlessly with Teacher Chin. Only I seemed like a child. I suddenly felt that my nightmare had truly become when he bullied me as a child. Was it just because he was still now that he's grown, so I, with great magnanimity, forgive Su Qingru for all the bad. I feel a bit happy and prepare to take the test paper from Su. But she didn't let go. She calmly said 2 words, fool. Upon hearing this, my face, but Su Qingro calmly released her grip on my test paper. Her calmness made me wonder if I was a bit stuck and slowly took the test paper, placing it on my desk. Then I quickly turned to look at her. Did I hear it wrong, or did she really call me a fool? As soon as class was over, I pulled Liu Yu to the corner where Jack and I started by saying, I know. Bro, you talked about Jack before. Liu Yu seemed very excited. He interrupted me eagerly. Let me speak for. I just heard something. He was so excited and happy. In the last class, weren't there many adding the transfer students at that time, I actually found it a bit why no boys from our class added her. There are a few active guys in our class too. Then after they left, I heard someone in our class that the QR code the transfer student gave. Guess whose it was? I shrugged and said, it can't be yours, right? Liu Yu knocked on me with disbelief. Who else could it be? The transfer student just arrived. I shook my head, indicating. Liu Yu said, gloating, it's old Chin's. I opened my mouth in disbelief. I couldn't imagine how old Chin would react when he got so many friend requests. Liu Yu sighed. If I were one of those boys, I would probably hate Su. Too cruel. Then he continued, hey, the transfer student is not only beautiful, but she also doesn't flirt around. Zhang Yichen, you get to sit next to her. You must have saved the galaxy in your. But when I heard this, my expression I wasn't happy at all. I didn't have a single look of happiness. Liu Yu didn't notice it. He was still immersed in his beautiful fantasy of Su. He casually asked, what were you about to say earlier? I calmly replied, I know Su Jinro. Liu Yu smiled indifferently and nodded. Now I know Su Qingro too. Even her name sounds so beautiful. I added, Su Qingro lives next door to me. Liu Yun suddenly turned. Are you kidding me? He said. I confidently answered, Su Jinro and we've known each other since we were in the. But she moved away in the 4th grade of primary. Now it seems she's moved back. Liu Yu was completely taken aback by the. Are you serious? He asked. I sighed. I'd be lying if I said no. Excited, Liu Yu pinched his arm. It hurt so much, he yelled. After soothing the pain, Liu Yu grabbed my shoulders excitedly. Opportunities are within reach. You mustn't waste such a resource. In 1 week, I want to see you as her child and boyfriend in front of the whole. I twitched the corner of my mouth. Suddenly, I remembered she had called me in class earlier and got angry again. Honestly, I'm not even familiar with her, and we've had grudges. If we have any relationship, it can only be a hostile one. Liu Yu looked at me with clenched teeth. His curiosity was clearly piqued. What kind of untold stories do you two? He quickly pressed, so I dug up a few memories of some absolutely horrific bullying incidents. I shared them, and I thought Liu would at least sympathize with my experience, if not stand on the same side with me. But all I saw was his lecherous expression. Having known Liu for 3 years, I was all too familiar with this look. I asked helplessly, what kind of romantic novel plot are you Don't kiss me, cool school bell. The neighbor's sister is so bad, and Liu Yu was staring at Zhang Yichen with, do you know? Some girls show their affection by bullying. I was speechless, stunned for a moment, then, you didn't go through those dark years. Suchingro was the nightmare of my childhood. Liu Yu casually responded, those childhood nightmares might turn into your spring dreams when you grow. I gritted my teeth in anger. You should stop reading those worthless books. Then we kept chatting all the way to the class. We ran into Su Qingrong at the water He was staring at me intently, with a slight smirk. He had somehow grabbed a disposable cup and stood. Liu Yu winked at me, but I pretended not to notice, calmly walking past and back to my seat. Liu Yu's seat was moved. As soon as he sat down, he started to. Su Qingro hadn't even finished filling the cup. He handed the water card to a boy and softly said, thank you. The boy, who heard the thanks, blushed instantly. He mustered the courage to say, hi, I'm Shenjie. Nice to meet you. Liu Yu was startled for a moment. When he heard the self, it really was Shenjie. Immediately, he gritted his teeth. It's Shenjie again. He and Shenjie had. Back then, he was chasing the goddess of their middle. After much effort, there was finally some. The goddess would bring him milk, but then at some point, Shenjie managed to win her over. While Liu Yu was still struggling, the two of them were already watching romance, and now Shenjie was trying to woo Zhang. This was intolerable. Liu Yu glanced at me. His eyes started to turn craftily. His eyes twinkled with a craft. He kept it in mind. He quickly grabbed my water cup. Under my puzzled gaze, he enthusiastically asked, do you want some? I'll get it for you. Back when we were desk mates, we often helped each other fetch water. I assumed he was just bored, so I agreed. Sure. Liu Yu quickly headed to the water. I glanced at him and noticed Su Qingro was still standing with Shenjie beside him. Knowing Liu Yu's history with Shenjie, his eagerness to fetch water, and specifically using my cup, suddenly gave me a bad feeling. As I was lost in thought, I suddenly saw Su Qingro glance sideways at. Our eyes met for a brief moment. I immediately looked away, glancing at the sign on the back wall, then calmly looked back, pretending I was just checking the. Meanwhile, Liu Yu had reached the battlefield. Shenjie noticed him, but only gave us continuing to talk. I traveled to England during middle school. At this point, Liu Yu interrupted. Your deskmate asked you to fetch a cup. Su Qingro seemed startled by the remark. Shenjie's words were cut off. Liu Yu held out the cup as if it was. It seemed like this might really be. Su Qingro naturally took the cup, but he didn't have a water card, and Liu Yu made no move to hand him one. He simply handed the cup to Su Qing, saying, then please take it back to him. With that, Liu Yu hopped away, not sparing a glance at Shenjie. Shenjie was both angry and Liu Yu's actions were, but he was confused as to why. Brought up Zhang Yichen. Wasn't Su Qingro just how did they get so close already? But Shenjie wasn't scared. But Shenjie wasn't afraid. Zhang Yichen is just a bookworm, a student returning from. How could Su Qingro ever like? Thinking about this, Shenjie felt a bit better. Noticing Liu Yu watching him, he deliberately handed out his smiling gently, you can use mine. I couldn't just keep staring at them, so I buried my head back in my book. Though I felt restless, I had a bad feeling that was up to something. From the corner of my vision, a hand placed a cup of warm water in front of me. I immediately looked up angrily. What mischief did you do with my cup? Su Qingro froze with the cup in his hand. Then a smile played on his lips. What? Are you mad? I came back. I didn't expect it to be Su Qingro bringing. I was momentarily stunned. My fierce demeanor immediately I stammered. Why are you the one bringing me? Where's Liu Yu? Su Qingro casually replied, the classmate who handed me the cup. As he spoke, he sat down. I turned to look, and sure enough, saw Liu Yu winking at me. I glared at him fiercely. Su Qingro, seeing my annoyed expression, suddenly raised his hand, but stopped halfway. When I turned my head, I saw his strange move. I backed away cautiously and asked, What are you doing? Suchingro withdrew his hand, slowly replying, nothing much. But the height of his hand suggested he wanted. I remembered how, back in elementary school, the troublesome sister next door often up my hairstyle. Someone I had tucked away was now right in front of me. I felt a sense of unreality. Hesitantly, I leaned closer and whispered, Suching, are you the same Suchingro I know? Suchingro raised an eyebrow and leaned closer to me as well. His tone sounded a little displeased. I thought you recognized the moment you walked into the class. I pursed my lips, suppressing the strange, fluttering emotion rising within me. No, I'd long forgotten about you. I extended my wrist, revealing a matching red mole. If I hadn't seen your mole, I wouldn't have remembered. Suchingro also turned over his wrist. The red mole on both wrists was in almost identical spots. A strange sense of fate hovered. For some reason, his tone suddenly turned in. He simply replied with an airy, oh. I belatedly realized that my words might have been a bit harsh. I quickly explained what I meant was, it's been so many years after. That was all stuff from when we were kids, right? You can't expect me to remember you forever. You can't expect a child's memory to be that great. Suchingro didn't care for my then why didn't I forget you? I was stunned, regretting maybe it's because my appearance hasn't changed. The more I spoke, the more so I simply shut up. Suchingro was also silent for a while. Then suddenly he chuckled. True, from clown to grown. I was furious. As a kid, I was often tormented by this older sister, but I didn't know whether to retort or mock. If I retorted, wouldn't that make me seem narcissistic? But what could I even mock back with? Suchingro wasn't ugly at all now. Calling him ugly would be totally While I was stuck in the best opportunity to respond had frustrated, I turned my head and buried myself in my workbook, ignoring him. But Suchingro seemed to get into the mood. He poked my arm with his pen, lazily saying, classmate Zhang, don't just focus on writing by. Your new deskmate doesn't even have a single book. I buried myself even more in my work, even shifting slightly into the corner. Suchingro wasn't giving up. He kept poking me with his pen. Since my left side was I couldn't move any further. I felt like a cornered rabbit, shivering as the hunter trapped me. I clung tightly to my workbook, almost lying flat on the desk. Suchingro sighed ambiguously, just about to say when a male voice interrupted him. You can use my workbook first. I have to prepare the blackboard design, so I won't need it anyway. It was Shenjie. Both Suchingro and I turned to Shenjie stood in the aisle, looking completely confident. Then he extended his workbook towards us. Suchingro glanced at the back of the workbook, where Shenjie's name was clearly written. His gaze sharpened, but his face showed no emotion. Still, he didn't take the workbook. I was confused. Shenjie was unusually enthusiastic. He wasn't normally like this. I looked at Suchingro and happened to meet his eyes. Our gazes locked. I was startled by the coldness in his eyes. This made me even more confused. Could it be that he felt embarrassed? After hesitating, I reached out and took the workbook for him. I placed it on his desk and said, our class is full of love. Suchingro's gaze grew even colder. It felt like he glared at me. I blinked innocently, even more bewildered. Suchingro lowered his eyes and paused, finally saying a quiet, thank you to Shenjie glanced at me and smiled. No, if you need anything, Su, feel free to. I won't find it troublesome. As if I'd never lend my workbook to Suchingro. It's like he's annoyed. I don't know where Shenjie's hostility comes. Maybe it was Lu Yu who provoked him when. I'm not making this up. My seat is in the southwest. Shenjie's seat is in the northeast. It would be really troublesome to come over. Shenjie specially ran over to give Suchingro the That's already quite troublesome. In that brief moment, I suddenly realized Shenjie came so promptly. Could it be that he was watching us from his seat? Why was he watching us? Could it be that I gulped and sneaked a glance at love at first sight doesn't happen. Beauty truly causes trouble. Shenjie was momentarily. He wanted to say something, but seeing Suchingro purse her lips beside him, he gave up. Anyway, his purpose was achieved. Just now, he had been observing he realized that in terms of attracting others, instead of talking properly, I had to lean. Could they be sharing some secret? How long have they even known each other? And leaning over the desk to act all aloof as if no one could tell? Shenjie was just here to interrupt. I'm leaving now. Just put it back on my desk after you're done. It's over there. Shenjie pointed to a seat behind Suchingro. Suchingro tilted her head to glance and nodded lightly. Shenjie smiled gently. He waved his hand and left. I felt like a third. So unnecessary. Just then, the class bell. The teacher hadn't arrived yet. I stopped looking at Suchingro, pursed my lips, sat up. Suchingro also sat quietly, unmoving. Well, not completely unmoving. His gaze shifted from the empty desk to me quietly working on questions nearby. He noticed my bangs covered part of my eyes, hiding the expression in them. Suchingro looked at me somewhat. The two of us hadn't met for 5 years, and those 5 years were a time of growth. A lot had changed. My features had become sharp and my facial features more, but the clumsy and silly vibe I had hadn't really changed. It made people want to tease me. That morning, when Su Chingro left his home, just stepping out of the he saw a boy walking absent-mindedly, kicking pebbles along the way. Still the same bad habit. It immediately reminded Su Chingro, but after all, we hadn't met in Su Chingro wasn't 100% sure. He wanted to get closer to but didn't want to seem too obvious, so he decided to pretend to bump into me, then apologize and check, just a way to confirm if it was me. As we brushed past each other, Su Chingro smiled. He was happy to see me again. He thought I would stop and greet him, but I walked away without looking back. At this moment, but the more I wrote, my arm on the desk was getting sore. When I glanced to the right, I realized Su Chingru had pushed me to the wall, and he still hadn't moved back. The classroom was quiet. I paused for 3 seconds and turned to. It seemed like our eyes met briefly in the process. Su Chingru was glancing at Shenjie's workbook. I froze thinking it must be a coincidence. I didn't care. I took out a pen and lightly tapped on the desk between us. When Su Chingro turned to look at me, I softly said, "Classmate Su, you've crossed the line." Su Chingro glanced at me indifferent and said, "Where did I cross?" Hearing that, I frowned. "You're sitting in the middle of the desk. Young lady, you went abroad for a while, and it's fine if you can't speak properly, but are you blind too?" Of course, I only complained I just picked up my pen again, pointed to the dividing line on the desk. "See that?" Su Chingro didn't care. She waved her hand and said, "You're not past the 38th line." I stared at her speechlessly, but it didn't intimidate her at all, like a little fierce puppy. Su Chingro raised her eyebrow, deciding to show mercy and let me. She moved aside on her own. We didn't say another word until the end of class, but I did notice something. She didn't even open Shenji's workbook. When class ended, she directly asked a girl across the aisle to pass the workbook to Shenji. Her reason was that she didn't know where. The girl's name was Song Meng. She's a social gets along with everyone. Initially, she had no intention of talking to Su Chingro, but she didn't expect Su Chingro to talk to her first, and her tone didn't match her cold appearance. So after passing the work, Song Meng started chatting with her. At first, I wasn't paying attention, but Song Meng was just too talkative. So I overheard. I happened to catch Song Meng saying, "Have you ever had Peking duck? I think roast suckling pig abroad. After all, the lotus leaf chicken here is also really good. We could go out sometime like seafood barbecue." Su Chingro smiled faintly. "I don't eat meat." Su Chingro smiled faintly. "I don't eat meat," or Meng let out an "oh." She continued, "I think electrically roasted Peking duck. Now that the country is heavily promoting, we should support electric. Traditional charcoal roasting pollutes the environment." Su Chingro smiled faintly. He didn't respond. I thought Su Chingro might think Song Meng was a bit too obsessed, and so the afternoon passed. Besides studying hard, I occasionally felt sleepy. I also reminded Lu Yu multiple times to stop saying nonsense, to keep his mouth shut. I didn't want others to know about my relationship with Su Ching. There's really nothing to say. Talking about it intentionally, I've always been low-key. However, it seemed the heavens didn't plan to give me this chance. After school, I packed my bag, grabbed a few papers, and prepared to go home. Dad was meeting an old friend. Who knows what time he'd be back tonight. When Mom loses her temper, only Dad, with his usual calmness, could speak a few good. Thinking about this left me feeling down. Su Chingro noticed too. Seeing me zoning out at the English test paper, his tone was rather, "Don't tell me you'll cry over bad grades." I snapped out of it and glared at him. "Of course not," I said dryly. When Su Chingro transferred school, he actually sat 3 tests in the office: Chinese, math, and English. Now all of them were spread, except for Chinese. Both math and, though Chinese wasn't a full score, it was still first in the class. I gritted my teeth, thinking, how. Su Chingro leisurely packed up his test papers. "Your grades are so bad. I think you don't really want to see my No one around." I looked around. After confirming no one was, I glared at him fiercely. "I don't want to see you either." Su Chingro blinked me. "This really doesn't seem right." I sneered. I picked up my bag. Su Chingro followed me out. We bumped into Song Meng at the door. Song Meng glanced at us. She casually said, "You seem to get along." She said it casually, but I took it. There were already some guys in the hallway, talking while occasionally glancing at us. When they heard Song Meng's words, the whole hallway suddenly became. I immediately panicked. I quickly made up an excuse. Classmate Su couldn't find the school. Song Meng let out an "oh." She didn't think much of it. Then she hurried downstairs. She's always in a rush after school. For some reason, I just said awkwardly, "Let's go, Classmate Su." I quickened my pace and walked a few steps ahead, then slowed down. After making sure, I continued walking forward. While going downstairs, I overheard people around talking about the new I even saw someone. They must have done great deed to be lucky enough to sit next. I was speechless. I was about to argue with them, But Suchingro caught up with me from behind, walking side by side with. As we left the school gate, we passed through a cherry blossom avenue. The avenue was lined with, and all the trees, it was the blooming season. The sight was breathtaking. It's the blooming season now. Every day after class, you can see boys and girls coming here to admire the profusion of flowers. Every time I pass by, I can't help but slow down. I enjoy the scent of cherry blossom. Today, there was a slight, it blew the cherry blossoms. The scene was stunning. Several students, seeing no teachers around, secretly took out their phones. I also wanted to capture them, but I hesitated to take out my phone, knowing our school has strict phone inspection. However, a certain transfer student who still needs his phone for contact caught my attention. My eyes lit up. I cheerfully turned to ask Suching. Then I heard a click. My cheerfulness vanished. I looked at Suchingro, who camera aimed directly at me. Suchingro was wearing a hat. He murmured softly, caught in the act. Sorry? But his tone didn't sound apologetic at all. I ran a few steps, trying to grab his. What did you take? Let me see. Suchingro quickly slipped his phone into his pocket. In front of so many people, you can't force it. I certainly couldn't just reach into his pocket. I wasn't sure if I was angry. I glanced at his pocket, then at his devilishly attractive face. For a moment, he looked so I froze. My face instantly turned. I angrily shouted, Suchingro, I'm all grown up now. You can't bully me like you used to. Suchingro shrugged nonchalantly. Though his hat obscured most of his face, his perfect figure still drew attention. Many people were looking our way. Seeing this, I quickly turned, and if I can't confront him, at least I can avoid. Thinking back to the mischievous sister who used to bully, I couldn't help but quicken my pace. Just someone called out, Yichin. I stopped. I looked around. For a moment, I didn't see any familiar faces. Could I have misheard? I hesitated for a moment, then continued walking. Just as I reached the road, out of the corner, I noticed a black car pulling up beside me. The front window rolled down, revealing a woman's beautiful face. She smiled and called out to me again. Yichin? That face was both unfamiliar. I covered my mouth in surprise. Mom? Suchingro's voice came from behind me. It was Aunt Sue. I used to adore her when I was little. She was our neighbor, living right next. What a coincidence. Chingro is here too. Aunt Sue smiled and asked, Yichin, do you still remember me? I replied, of course I remember you, Aunt Sue. Sweet and sour pork. Braised pork, Suchingro muttered cold, walking around me to open the car door. Now you remember. I felt a little awkward. Aunt Sue looked at the two of us, smiling as she said, hurry up, your parents are waiting at the hotel. I quickly nodded. It turned that when Mom said at lunch, she was referring to Uncle Sue. After driving for about half an hour, we arrived at the hotel. Sure enough, my parents were there. Then, I saw a middle-aged man sitting next to my dad. I politely greeted him, Uncle Sue. Uncle Sue smiled and responded. Standing up from his seat, he came over and compared our heights. It's been a few years, and you've grown so much. My dad added, exactly. In the blink of an eye, it feels like just yesterday he was wetting the bed. Hearing that, I wanted to find a hole to hide. Soon, after everyone exchanged I sat next to my mom, and Suchingro sat next to her mom. We weren't seated together. As we sat down, Suchingro even pulled out the chair for me. I was speechless. Is this really the... She's like a completely... My mom nudged my arm lightly. Aren't you going to thank your sister? Seeing my reluctance, she added, what's the matter? That's your sister Chingru from your child. Don't you remember? At this point, what a coincidence. When handling Chingru's transfer, she randomly picked a class, and it turned out now they're even deskmates. The topic of calling her sister, I breathed a sigh of relief, but I glanced at Suchingro, sitting to she's really good at just as I finished complaining she glanced at me with a mischievous smirk. Then she slowly said, little Chen here is the class. I'll probably need his help a lot, right? Hearing her call me, dragging out the last syllable of Chen, I felt utterly. It was as if I had been swatted hard by an Goosebumps rose all over my body. But with all the elders watching, I could only force a fake smile and say, Sister Chingro, you're joking. Suchingro raised her delicate but didn't say anything. Uncle Sue turned to my dad, laughing heartily. Ah, the kids are all grown up. They can't even bring themselves to call. He added, back in our we used to call each other with. Hearing this, the way things were, does that mean I would have to call her? I almost laughed at the thought. Hearing this, I couldn't help but how things were in my parents' generation. Would I really have to call her Su Qingrong? But then my dad joined in, reminiscing, yeah, I used to call you Hong, and little Chen's mom Bai. It's not common anymore. My mom, who usually maintained a dignified, her temple twitched, and she took a sip of tea to calm. Aunt Sue teased, bitchin', if you're too shy to call her sister, just call her Qingru. Uncle Sue nodded in agreement. I was shocked, looking at Su Qingru, trying to stay calm as she didn't say much in response. In front of the elders, she was smiling gently, just the right amount. As everyone continued chatting, The waiters started serving the dishes. Midway through the meal, Aunt Sue suddenly nudging Uncle Sue and saying, "Oh, I almost forgot something. Why didn't you remind me?" Uncle Sue looked startled, then suddenly remembered. "I left it in the car." He quickly pulled out his phone to call the driver, asking him to bring up the black box from the trunk. While the adult, I wasn't paying much attention. Suddenly, a lobster landed on my plate. I froze and turned to look at Suchingro, who lazily put down. "What are you doing?" I asked, annoyed. Seemingly unsatisfied with me, she sighed regretfully. In a teasing tone, she asked, "You're not afraid of— I remember you got pinched by one. Didn't it traumatize you?" The adults were engrossed in their paying no attention to us. I knew she wasn't being sincere. Feeling indignant, I retorted, "You think I haven't made any progress?" Suchingro smiled at me, her tone full of mockery. "Yet your English is—" I was completely at a loss for words. Suchingro looked at me, smiling. "Your English is still just as bad." I was at a loss for— I scoffed. "Even if I haven't made progress, it's better than someone getting worse, getting more and more child. Yichin, little brother, don't sit well with Sister Chingro," Suchingro said lazily. Then, as if something occurred to her, she— "Come on, little brother. Say Sister Chingro for me to—" I turned my head, refusing to engage. I picked up the drink on the table. I hadn't even swallowed it complete when I suddenly heard someone shout. Startled, I choked immediately, coughing while covering my mouth. My mom quickly came over to pat my back. "Slow down. What are you doing?" Calmly, Suchingro handed me 2 napkins. I coughed even harder. Once I finally settled down, I saw Aunt Sue walking over. She handed me a delicate red velvet box. "Yichin, here's your welcome gift." I hadn't expected a gift. I quickly stood up and took the box. "Thank you, Aunt Sue, Uncle Sue. This was actually chosen by Chingru," Aunt Sue added. I felt a lump in my throat, glancing at the expectant Suchingru. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Thank you, Sister Chingru." Suchingru smiled sweetly. "You're welcome. Hurry up and open it. See if you like it." I sat down and untied the ribbon on the box, pressing a button on the outside of the box. It opened automatically, revealing a fountain pen. It was a pen with an exceptionally stylish design. I have to admit, the moment I saw the pen, I loved it instantly. Soon the banquet ended. Everyone left in good spirits. When I got home, my childhood nightmare had returned. She transferred to my class, and we were now deskmates. Although it didn't seem so nightmarish now, her personality was still off. The next day, I managed to wake up early, even though my brain still felt half. After washing up, I went down. I saw my dad constantly winking at me. I was stunned. My mind cleared immediately. Every time my dad used this look on me, it was a reminder that Mom was about to scold me. Sure enough, I turned my head and saw my mom glaring at me fierce. "Yi Chen, last night, after you— I saw the grade sheet posted in the class. Do you know what rank you got in this monthly exam? Come here and see for your—" "I don't know," I weakly replied. "I only know that everyone in the class didn't." The ranking sheet wasn't publicly— I walked over, borrowed the phone, and took a— Number 35, named Jiang Yichen. I had dropped from 9th place to 35th. Dad knew about this last night. He patted me on the shoulder. "It's normal to not do well once. You have to stay at the bottom to better remember what it feels like to be." Mom shot Dad a glare, then turned to me saying, "Bring your test paper." I felt like I'd been struck by light. I put down the phone and took out my school bag. I spread the test papers out on the Mom was clearly very upset. She didn't even pick them up to look at. Instead, she stood there, coldly scrutinizing them from above. Dad glanced at the time and reminded her, "Dear, if Yi Chen doesn't leave now, he'll definitely be— It's just a small month. Don't put too much pressure on the kid." Before Mom could retort, he turned to me and said, "Put the paper— I'll drive you to school." On the way, Dad didn't mention the monthly exam. At school, I ran all the way to the teaching building. I bumped into Shenjie head on. We were both startled. Shenjie quickly regained his composure. He let out a soft mocking, then, as if his eyes flickered, and he said sarcastically, You did pretty well this time, didn't you?" 35th place. I smiled and nodded. Hanxin didn't score as well. I really didn't pay much attention to Shenji's, but I seem to recall Liu Yu mentioning it. He said Shenji's rank is always lingering in the bottom 20 or so. Shenjie continued to gloat. "I improved by 3 places this." I smiled, too lazy to respond, and turned to enter the class. As soon as I entered, I saw a group of classmates gathered around the Getting closer, I heard they were discussing the grade sheet, so I squeezed in for a look. On the second page, I found Shenji's name. 52nd place out of 65 students. At that moment, I couldn't help but laugh. I shook my head and walked to my seat. Shenjie chased after me, unwilling to give up. "Why are you laughing? Didn't I improve? Aren't you the one falling behind?" Hearing this, I glanced at him and— "Yeah, so what?" Shenjie smirked and said, "So at this rate, I'll surpass you soon. How does that make you feel? Nervous?" At that moment, someone nearby interjected, "Do you think this is You win one round, I win the next?" Liu walked over, placing a box of yogurt on my desk. He smiled and said, "Yi Chen, I'm here to feed you." Then Liu Yu turned to Shenjie, deliberately mimicking a high-pitched voice. "Do you want some? I've got a walnut-flavored one here." Hearing this, Shenjie shot us a glare and stormed off in a huff. I watched his retreating figure and couldn't help but laugh. So this is what he's kind of cute, actually. This was actually my first interaction with Shen. He was nothing like I imagined. Lu Yu smirked and said, "You're trying to say he's dumb." "Yeah, he's super dumb. If you say he's so that he won my goddess's heart, then I might actually believe it. But he's not just dumb. He's also incredibly annoying." I looked at Lu Yu, puzzled, and asked, "Why is Shenjie suddenly so hostile toward— What exactly did you do with my water bottle yesterday? I didn't get a chance to ask you." Lu Yu stammered for a moment, then quickly grinned at me apologetically. "Look, I already bought you yogurt to make up." "Yogurt as an apology?" I said. "No, it's not like that. It's just that when I saw the grade sheet," Lu Yu quickly changed the subject. Then, leaning closer, he whispered, "I just wanted— So I handed your water bottle to Suqing and told her, your desk mate— Not only that, but I didn't give— She ended up using her provincial— Hearing this, I felt both touched and conflicted. I turned to Lu Yu, but before I could— He bolted. I wanted to chase after him, but I saw a striking figure entering through the classroom. I froze on the spot. After hesitating for a moment, when Suqingru entered the classroom, she didn't return to her seat immediately. Instead, she stopped by the Glancing at it, Suqingru seemed to carry an aura of natural authority. A few people instinctively stepped aside, making room for her to see more. The class president, the only one in our class who had spoken to, was also looking at thinking it necessary to this top student who had— He said, "Suqingru, don't be misled. Our class scores are unusually low this time, but it's because the test was too— Everyone's scores are low, but even among these low scores, we can see a group of future stars holding their ground. For example, our class's study monitor still managed to maintain a 3-digit score, and our math representative scored an impressive 120. Suqingru listened as if she wasn't listening, occasionally replying with a soft, but her gaze didn't follow the class, pointing at various spots. Instead, she stared at— The class president continued, "And our Chinese your desk mate, Zhang Yichen. His Chinese score is still leading the way. Class first, grade second. Wait, where's his name?" The class president scratched his head awkwardly. "This is really unexpected. His overall scores have always been in the top 10. I didn't expect him to mess up." Hearing this, Suqingru looked up at me, and our eyes met. She was just about to return to her when the class president seemed to— and called out, "Suqingru, Mr. Chin wants you to go to the academic office." Suqingru placed her white backpack on her and pushed it in. "Okay." The class president added, "Do you still remember where the academic— If not, let Zhang Yichen guide you." Suqingru, being familiar, hesitated for a moment, then she smiled faintly. "Oh, I actually forgot. I didn't feel like— So I made up but I need to collect the Chinese assignments." The class president widened his eyes. "I haven't finished a few questions yet." "No way, you have to go. You can do it by then I'll have finished." I felt a bit frustrated. What's the saying? Hoisted by my own petard. "Well done, class president." The class president, to finish his homework, left with no choice and stood up to go. We walked one behind the other. I peeked into the office from outside. All the subject teachers were, so I leaned against the wall. To Suqingru, I said, "You can go straight in and look for— I'm leaving now." After speaking, I turned to leave. But Suqingru gently tugged at my sleeve. "Good people help to the— You can't give up halfway." She adorably blinked her eyes. The class represented— I looked at the door of the police office. Countless times I asked myself why I agreed to stay. Sure enough, women who can act coquettishly have the— It turns out that Suqingru was right to have me stay. The books Suqingru needed to collect were in addition, there were 2 sets of— one for autumn and winter, one for— Both were packed in plastic bags. The bags were— As Suqingru walked out of the office carrying the uniform bag slipped from her arms and landed right at my feet, so I picked it up for her and held it in my arm. "Let's go, classmate." Suqingru smiled at me. As we passed by the music class, a beautiful piano melody came through. I quickly ran a few standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass window. Suqingru slowed down and seeing me watching intently. She also looked inside. Inside the music classroom, there was a boy and a girl, and the boy sat beside, holding a violin in his arm, occasionally playing a few— That senior sister's name is— I took the initiative to explain to— She plays the piano exceptionally. Every time the school has an event, she even substituted for a female teacher and taught a semester of music class. Suqingru snorted lightly and asked about the boy. I looked at the boy again and continued introducing him. That senior he's very well known, handsome, and has always been in the top 10. He often serves as the host of school events. Rumor has it, he's the son— Suqingru snorted again, without emotion, mocking the scene. A perfect match with a talent— Don't talk nonsense. They are not— I'm afraid someone inside might hear. I hurriedly gave him a glance, but it seems someone inside still heard. The piano sound gradually— Chu Mengyao looked out the window. She smiled gently. I waved at her and smiled happily as well. And Yicheng also looked out, His gaze swept over, and I saw Su Qingru and I didn't see them. He pointed ahead to Chu Mengyao, then made a walking gesture. Finally, he waved at her. It meant I was leaving. Chu Mengyao also smiled and waved at me. Then I looked at Su Qingru. Let's go. Can you still carry it? Let me help you with it. After saying that, I took the books and just hugged them in my arms. Let's go, Su classmate. She nodded, and as we were about to pass the glass window, I looked back at the music classroom. Chu Mengyao was still smiling. She watched us return to the class. I placed the books on the desk, then sat down heavily. I was so tired. Seeing this, Su Qingru lightly teased. I could hear the mocker. I grumpily asked, who am I doing this for? Su Qingru snorted. She didn't speak. She didn't speak until class was over. After class, I was going to get I wanted Su Qingru to move her seat forward. Before I could say anything, Su Qingru looked up at me. She smiled gently and spoke softly. I'll go get it for you. I was a bit confused. We've only been desk mates but I've already decided that her behavior hasn't improved. Such moments of gentleness are rare. I didn't believe it. My mind spun a few times, and then are you trying to borrow my water cup? Su Qingru heard this. The smile on her face faded. I placed both the water cup and the water card for applying for and recharge. You have to go to the office. Are you still waiting for the school to give it to you? And stop pretending to smile like. Su Qingru's smile vanished completely. She coldly sneered. She coldly said 4 words. Go yourself. I knew it would be like this. Pretentious. A nasty, childish perv. Su Qingru now had an additional adjective. Unpredictable. In the end, I didn't go to get because Lu Yu came to find me to go. Su Qingru slowly moved her chair to give me space. Lu Yu loves spicy strips. Almost every time he buys 1 or 2 packs. This time was no different. As soon as we entered, he went straight to the shelf full of spice. I kept looking at Lu Yu. I actually crave spicy strips too, such junk food, but I'm a little allergic to them. I still have some allergy ointment from eating less this time should be fine. I stood there struggling, hesitating I said to Lu Yu, can you grab 1 more pack? Lu Yu didn't forget that I can't eat spice. You want to eat? I just want to try. But to be honest, squid definitely won't let me eat. So I cleverly said I won't eat them. I'll bring a pack for Su Qingru. He wants to eat. Really? Su Qingru didn't seem like who would love eating such junk food. Maybe he likes spicy. I secretly smiled and nodded, thinking that after eating them, the taste in my mouth I'd need to buy a drink to wash it down. So I asked Lu Yu, do you want a drink? How come Su Qingru wants you to buy him a drink? I just want a drink. It's fine to bring him a bottle of water. I said this, and suddenly a light bulb went off in my head. I was reminded by Lu Yu and thought, Su Qingru doesn't have a water card wait, then why did he borrow my water card? Could it be that he really wanted to get water? I was stunned, and Lu Yu was, what are you talking about? I didn't know how to explain. I wasn't sure myself. So I shook my head and said, never mind. I'll bring Su Qingru a bottle of water. If you want a drink, I'll grab it too. Lu Yu had already picked out the snacks. I'll go with you. Meanwhile, after no one was watching, and after on the other side of the spike, a boy stood deep in thought. His phone was still open to a message page. It was a brief conversation. Did you see that girl we encountered Is she Jiang Yichen's? I've never seen her before. I don't know, but I heard that I saw them coming from It must be her. The boy paused for a moment, then, somewhat hesitant, and sent a message. Do you know the name of the new The reply came quickly. If you mean the well-known, I know her, the other person replied quickly. Chen Ge, aren't you the one who usually, why are you suddenly interested in this train? And Yicheng replied, nothing. I mistook someone. When Lu Yu and I returned to class, it was almost time. We had to leave the snacks for the big break to eat. I sat down holding a bag of snacks under Su Qingru's. When Lu Yu and I returned, it was almost time for class. The snacks had to be saved for the big break. I sat down holding a bag under the same kind of gaze from Su Qing. I awkwardly explained, don't look at me. This is food for the whole day. It's not all for one time, and I'll share it with my friends. Actually, I can't eat that much. Su Qingru's mouth curved up slightly. What is there to explain? I didn't say anything. I calmly said, your look already gave you away. You're thinking I'm a pig, right? Someone who can eat this. As soon as I said this, I saw Su Qingru. By the time she realized it, Su Qingru looked a little pained, which was true. I sneered. I took out the soda water I got for her and threw it directly into her. I was kind enough to bring someone water, but that person cursed me in their heart. Su Qingru caught the soda water I threw at her with one hand. She was a little She didn't expect me to actually bring her something. She looked at the bottle, then looked at me. Su Qingru's tone went up. Thank you, Zhang classmate, she said. I took the chance to ask about the conversation that I wondered if she misunderstood. I was about to, but the class bell rang. Mr. Chin walked in right after, so I had to stay silent for now. I thought I'd ask after. This time, Mr. Chin didn't just teach Chinese. He also held a brief class meeting. He summarized the recent months, especially praising the students who improved. He also reminded the top students not to, if you get arrogant, others will surpass you. I automatically I was silently admonishing myself. I lowered my head, feeling ashamed. Finally, the class ended. As soon as class ended, I laid down on my desk. I had done well yesterday because of Su Qingru's arrival. I performed well yesterday. Because of Su Qingru's arrival, the impact it had on me was I couldn't stay awake at all. But today, when I completely accepted the fact was my former childhood friend, feeling sleepy became a perfectly when I felt sleepy, I still pretended to hold a pen in my hand. It was a polite gesture. Originally, the pen tip was facing down, but as I gradually couldn't resist my hand holding the pen slumped onto the desk. The pen tip was now facing me. After class, there was a lot of I was disturbed and moved. I tightened I felt a tingling sensation on my in the distant sky. There was a faint sound of laughter. Su Qingru was watching. Unconsciously, I was drawing on my face, drawing and drawing. Soon, tangled black yarn ball was drawn. Su Qingru was watching with it. She didn't interrupt my thoughts at all. She even subconsciously reached to take a picture of but when she reached into her pocket, Su Qingru suddenly remembered that after Mr. Chin helped her with he had forbidden her from bringing her phone. She felt a bit regret. I was still unconsciously moving. The black lines on my face were expanding more and more. Soon, I was going to look like a cat with a Su Qingru had enough of. She was about to take the pen out of my hand with pity, but from behind, a hand suddenly before she could act. The hand grabbed and gently patted my shoulder. I hadn't written yet when Su Qingru turned around. It was a girl I didn't know. She was holding 2 cups of milk tea. They were still steaming. Then she looked at me and then glanced at Su Qingru, she made a small and then lightly moved her gaze away. She looked at the milk tea lady, then placed 1 cup on the windowsill next to me. At this moment, Lu Yu just happened. His line of sight was blocked by. He didn't see me sleeping. Lu Yu exclaimed, "Hey! Yang Yuting, you're here." Yang Yuting forced a smile. She handed Lu Yu the other cup of milk tea. "Here, this is for you." "Thank you, Ting Jie, for remembering me." Lu Yu grinned happily as he took the milk. He was about to say a few words. Suddenly, he remembered that Su Qingru was. The casual words immediately stopped. Lu Yu felt inexplicable. The scene was a bit like a battlefield, and Zhang Yichen was the male protagonist. It was only then that Lu Yu saw me lying on the table. There was a dark blotch on my face. Lu Yu slapped my back and said, "Zhang Yichen, get up or I'll sell you for beauty." I cried out in pain. I barely moved my eyelids. Still not knowing what happened. I'm really too tired. Just let me sleep. Big brother, get up and look at what you look. Lu Yu was not having it. I closed my eyes. I stretched out a hand and slapped it to the side. I happened to touch someone, thinking it was Lu Yu. So I patted Su Qingru like a reassurance. Then I grabbed her hand, resting my head on it. Shh. Su Qingru, whose arm was being pressed, Lu Yu couldn't bear to look at the faces. He directly pressed his iced milk tea on my neck. After 2 seconds, I suddenly I sat up straight and panicked. Still half dazed, I looked up and saw the 3 of them looking at me. I thought I was seeing double, but when I focused, the 3 images looked different. The double vision even had. I widened my eyes and looked. Gradually, I woke up. "What's going on?" Lu Yu raised his chin. He pointed at my greasy hand. I followed his gaze and reacted a second. Then I saw my hand resting on Su Qingru. The hand on I widened my eyes and quickly retracted. My ears were a little red. With a fierce expression, I said, "What are you doing putting your arm under my—" Su Qingru tilted her head. She stared at me with some speech. Lu Yu really couldn't bear to watch me. He took out a napkin and wiped it on my face. "Shut up, ancestor. First, wipe your face." I thought I had drooled. Embarrassed, I was about. Lu Yu found a makeup mirror from a female class. He brought it to me. I stared at myself in the mirror for 3. There were people around. I barely suppressed a scream, but anyone could see that I wasn't emotionally stable at them. Yang Yuting comforted me, saying, "You're quite cute. If you feel embarrassed, I'll paint a circle on." I then realized Yang Yuting had also done. She picked up a small mirror and wiped the black mark on her face. She asked me, "How did you get? Didn't you say you were going to another school for exchange?" It ended already. No water to wipe it off myself. I've rubbed it so much, but it's still. Yang Yuting replied, I haven't gone back to school yet. When I passed by the milk tea shop, I brought you a cup of milk tea. Yang Yuting pointed to the windows. "Your favorite iced milk tea with pudding. I knew you'd love it." I said, "Oh." Su Qingru suddenly glanced at me. I saw it in my periphery. She stayed silent for. She seemed to remember. She said to Yang Yuting, "You don't have to always pack it so perfect. It's like I eat a lot." Yang Yuting smiled. "It's all just little." Su Qingru sneered. "Are you drinking 8 treasure?" The 2 of them spoke almost simultaneously. I slowed down in wiping my face. I couldn't help but feel that it made me feel uncomfortable all over. Is it because there are too many people? Liu Yu, who was observing from the side, had a very. Those who watch the fun never. I replied first. Yang Yuting was listening attentively. Then she put down the mirror. Covering her dark cheek, she glared at Su Qingru. Yang Yuting was about to say. Just as she opened her mouth, I looked at Su. I suddenly said, "Right? Why do I suddenly have pen marks on my face? I didn't even have a pen. Did you draw on my face while I was asleep?" Su Qingru chuckled. In a sinister tone, she said, if you fall asleep in the next class, I'll just. Young Yuting glanced at Su Qingro again. She quickly said, it's not her. Don't blame others. When I came in, I took the black pen out of your hand. I sighed. Su Qingro glanced at Yang Yuting lightly. Yang Yuting then said, go wash it off with water in the. It won't come off by just wipe. Lu Yu also chimed in, bring some snacks too. And milk tea, right? After washing, we can go to the playground and. I nodded. I took the snacks out of the desk, then I rummaged through my bag for. What are you doing with money? Do you need to buy something? Lu Yu asked. I mumbled and counted. I took out 15 and handed it to Yang Yuting. The milk tea money. Yang Yuting pushed my hand back. What money? Friendship boats always sink because of you. Feeling embarrassed? Next time treat me. I thought about it and agreed, so I took the money back. I grabbed the paper and covered one side. We quickly left the classroom. Su Qingro's side suddenly became quiet. The noise felt far away from everything. Every second is changing. People are no different. He lowered his head and smiled self-deprecatingly. Then he stood up and left. Our group sat under the shade of a tree on the playground. I started unpacking snacks with Lu Yu. Yang Yuting stuffed a chip into her mouth. She said, Zhang Yichen, the new desk. I don't think I've seen you in our class before. I thought for a moment. I quoted what I had heard from people say Su Qingro is a high-achieving student. She has both looks and talent. Then I added my own comment. She looks pretty shiny, but in reality, she's a moody. Lu Yu was stunned. What have you been through today? You have such a low opinion of her. But with Yang Yuting beside me, I didn't say much. I just shook my head. The fierce look on my face. Yang Yuting felt a little more reassured. She thought it would be better to find Lu Yu. We shared the snacks. We quickly finished most of it. Yang Yuting went to throw the trash into the bin. As soon as she left, Lu Yu asked, are you getting along with Su so well? Pretty fast. Thanks to Su Qingru's extremely bad temper, she broke the awkwardness. Made me remember the days when. Now when I see Su Qingro, I get angry. I just want to argue back. I was silently complaining, and while Lu Yu was yawning, I quickly slipped a bag of spicy. Lu Yu didn't notice he was about to ask more when Yang Yuting came running back. So I spoke up. It's about time we need to. Yang Yuting checked her watch. We have 15 minutes left. Yang Yuting had already run back. So I spoke up. It's about time. We need to go back. We need to head back. Yang Yuting checked her watch. It's still break time. We still have 15 minutes left. I need to go to the restroom. All right, then I should be leaving too. Yang Yuting said, I'll come back to find. Bye-bye, I waved at Lu Yu. After they left, I nudged Lu Yu's arm. You go ahead first. I'm going to the restroom on. Lu Yu looked puzzled. Are you really going to the rest? I thought you were just making an I was startled, thinking Lu Yu had caught me hiding a pack of spice. I widened my eye, feeling flustered. Why would I make an excuse? Lu Yu, on the other hand, felt guilty, thinking I had seen through, but I didn't notice his guilt. Nothing. I'll leave first then. Mind the time, don't be late. Each of us with our own thought, we parted ways. I eagerly found a secluded corner to try a bite of the spice. Lu Yu thought, I'll never impulsively be someone else's wingman. This guy is so clueless. The spicy sticks were given by Lu Yu. The first bite was so spicy, I spit it. I choked several times. This is way too spicy. How could Lu Yu eat 2 packs without batting an eye? I furrowed my brows tightly, coughing from the drinks I bought earlier were all taken by Lu Yu. Even the milk tea was finished. I stood there for a while, but my mouth was still burning. I decided to buy a bottle of water, but realized I was completely at a loss. I thought about trying my luck at the shop's entrance, hoping to bump into someone I knew, to borrow 2 yuan. I stepped out from behind the tree, but hadn't walked far when I saw a small stage nearby. A stunning figure was sitting with their. From the back, wasn't that Su Jinrong? I never expected such Just as I was about to greet him, a strange thought crossed. I came to this secluded corner to secretly eat spicy. What could Su Qingro be doing? Was he hiding something too? Maybe I could catch him doing something. I quietly circled to the front of the stage, then suddenly jumped out in front of him. Su Qingro was visibly startled, but quickly recovered, swiftly pulling something from his mouth and hiding it. His movements were so fast, I only caught a glimpse of something white. But thanks to that quick motion, I immediately noticed the thing in his mouth that he was trying. A white, stick-like object dangled from something he didn't want. What else could it be? Su Qingro was smoking. The moment I reached that conclusion, I felt completely off balance. I was awkwardly not expecting this situation. I did catch him doing something, but not the kind of thing I wanted. Just then, Su Qingru spoke, his voice slight. What are you doing here? I stammered, well, then hesitated again. After thinking for a moment, I replied, I came. Yeah, right? The corner of Su Qingru's mouth curled. Why are you following your Qingru Jie? Seeing his expression, I was more convinced I felt conflicted, ignoring his nonsense. I said seriously, I won't tell anyone. Su Qingru paused mid-action, withdrawing the smile from in an unnatural tone. Who cares if you do or not? His right hand stubbornly remained behind. I frowned at him, saying school rules clearly forbid. I hesitated, unable to say those 2 words. I continued in a serious tone. It'll be big trouble. It will affect all your future evaluations. Your grades are so good. You might even get a recommendation for college. Suchingro seemed to be holding back. Her voice became strange and you have quite a high opinion of me, I said with a blank face. Only when it comes to grades, Suchingro retorted. My personality is great. The topic was about to be derailed. I clenched my fists in frustration. Can you take this seriously? If I didn't already know you well, who would care about you? A recommendation is for you. It has. Hearing this, Suchingro lowered her shoulders and chest were trembling. I paused my move. I thought to myself, no way is she that. Did I make her cry? I suddenly felt at a loss. Suchingro, please don't be like this. I won't say anything else, I said as I took a few steps closer, trying to see her expression. Suddenly, Suchingro looked up. A completely radiant smile appeared. Her face, bright and beautiful under the sunlight. For a few seconds, my heart skipped. I stared at her without blinking. Suchingro laughed freely and openly. Her whole body shook with joy. Suddenly, she leaned closer to me. We were incredibly close. Suchingro said, Did you think I was that dumb? Smoking on the field like that. What else would I have been doing? I slowly came back to myself. Only then did I realize how close we were. I took a step back. Suchingro noticed, but she said nothing, pulling something to her mouth. It seemed she had her entire posture relaxed with a sense. She held a white paper stick in her mouth. It didn't stop her from talking, though. Her tone was still that familiar, playful, yet provocative. It's Suchingro's unique tone. Xiao Chenchen is a lollipop. If caught, which school rule does this violate? When I realized what she was holding in her mouth, my whole face flushed red. I was both angry and completely speechless. All I wanted was to turn. A hand reached out and grabbed me. Don't go! Suchingro coaxed soft. Her voice was gentle. The next moment, she stuffed something into my hand. I looked down. Then I heard her teasing laughter again. Suchingro Jie has another candy. I froze for 2 seconds. She started holding back her laughter again. Just don't tell anyone. I still want that I held the lollipop in my hand, completely furious. Suchingro burst into laughter. Her laughter seemed so genuine and joyful. It echoed across the field, easily infecting my emotions. Stop laughing. I tried to keep a stern face, but I couldn't hold it for more than 5. Suddenly, I burst out laughing along with her. Clutching the candy in my hand, I felt both amused and annoyed. Suchingro actually sneaked to the field to eat a lollipop. Suchingro, the elite student, actually did something, sneaking to the field to eat junk food. I lost the last bit of self-control. I joined her in laughing loudly. The two of us laughed so suddenly, the sound of the school bell rang from the teaching building. Its long echo reverberated across the. My expression changed as I stopped laughing. I forgot about class. Now I was truly annoyed. I glared at Suchingro. Hurry, run. The next teacher is really strict. What are you afraid of? Suchingro gradually. She gave me a meaningful look. Report to the chemistry teacher, who's turned around and glanced at the. Why are you so late? I stayed calm. The new student needed to process their transfer. Teacher Zhao had something, so I took him around a few offices. Suchingro was behind me, holding a few documents. The chemistry teacher gave her a glance. Sure enough, the chemistry teacher said, "Come in." The two of us returned to our seats obediently. Ignoring the subtle look from the classmates under the podium, we acted as if it was Suchingru's idea. I, the class representative, the documents were just watercolor. It was a seamless collaboration. The whole class, except for Liu Yu, seemed unfazed. He widened his eyes as he watched us, his mind filled with questions like, how did they come back? What were they doing? Something's not right. With all these doubts, he spent the entire staring at the back of our heads. He looked at us no less than. Even the chemistry teacher couldn't help but. That boy in the last row. Did you sprain your neck? Liu Yu nodded awkwardly. I wasn't great at chemistry, so I was either asking or teaching Liu Yu questions he could. In between, I even went to the office to pick up the china and distribute them. I was as busy as a spinning top. The last self-study period allowed for, but with only 5 minutes left before school, I was still looking around the classroom, trying to find someone to help. Suchingro couldn't stand it any. She knocked on my desk with her knuckle. She said, if you ask others for help, they might be busy too. And the time you spend walking around could be used to explain several steps. I nodded in agreement. That's true. Suchingro lightly tapped the desk again. Why don't you ask your deskmate? I think I look quite like a top student. I pursed my lips, suddenly remembering Suchingru's perfect math. It was a perfect score. I'd never seen one before. Even though for this monthly, Suchingro only took 3 subjects and her scores weren't entered into her math was so good that it was unlikely her other science subject. But I couldn't help feeling that Suchingro had my eyes darted around and I said, are you annoyed by my constant questions? Suchingro didn't deny it. She held up 3 elegant fingers and waved them. Casually, she said, 3 yuan per question. I countered, but you have to let me try first. Even tutoring classes offer a few free trials, but Suchingro slowly replied, I don't want to teach anymore. I froze for a moment. Furiously, I turned to glare at her. Unhurriedly, Suchingru continued. That last sentence was me. Hearing this, I got angry. She even admitted it so confident. I was about to retort, but suddenly realized what she meant. If I don't want to teach anyone was messing with me, then it meant she did want to teach me. At this, Suchingro added that 3 yuan per question was also a joke. I was completely dizzy. I looked at her speechlessly and said, "Speak." Suchingro tilted her head, the corners of her mouth. With her usual playful tone, she said, "How could an older sister charge her younger brother for tutor? Isn't this what I should?" After saying this, the chemistry worksheet from my desk. Hearing this, my heart skipped a beat. The sudden change in atmosphere. I slowly exhaled a breath I'd been holding. I felt my ears getting a little warm. I steadied my racing heartbeat, trying not to let the nearby demon and weirdo notice any. Jokes aside, Suchingro still took the time between class to thoroughly explain those two chemists. The afternoon passed quickly, and soon it was the last class. It was another self-study period. I rubbed the skin under my eyes, twisted open a bottle cap, took a sip of water, and resumed reviewing my physics. When I got to the last question, I suddenly didn't understand. I checked the book, but still couldn't, so I tugged on Suchingro's sleeve. The classroom was very, and to avoid disturbing others, we had to speak. I leaned towards Suchingro, intending to ask for help. "Could you explain this question?" At this close distance, seeing his enchanting face, I froze completely. I forced myself to focus on and finally calmed down. But just as I started to relax, Suchingro, on the other hand, letting me look. In a low voice, he explained, "You wrote some steps backward for this one. I told you you'd forget." When Suchingro didn't hear a response, he looked up at me. My face was a bit red. Seeing him staring at me, my eyes showed a hint of panic. Suchingro paused, held his pen, and pointed in the air under my left. "It's really red." Feeling guilty, I retorted, "You're the one who—" Suchingro smiled. "Now your whole face is red." Looking at his stunning face, I said, "Can't you change your face? It's really hard to talk to with a face like yours." "That won't do." Suchingro set down his pen, smiling. "If I had a different face, how could I Xiao Chenchen for blushing?" I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, tried to calm the heat on my face. Heaven and earth can— This face is simply too unfair. I reached out again and scratched the skin. It was then I suddenly realized the spot Suchingro pointed at was where a mosquito had bitten me. Of course it was red. I was overthinking it. The heat I had just managed started rising again. The skin on my face was really itchy. I didn't dare to scratch it. I could only press it with my fingertips. Seeing me like this, Suchingro's expression gradually he pointed to his chin again, indicating that mine was red too. He moved closer, carefully examining my cheeks. He suddenly paused, sighed, and directly ordered me. I touched the spot he mentioned. I wasn't sure if it was just in my head but it really did feel— Wasn't it just a mosquito bite? Mosquitoes are really venomous. I suddenly remembered the spicy snack I ate this morning. My voice became hesitant. Suchingro caught on and stared at me expressionlessly. I didn't dare let anyone know the real— So I lied. "Maybe it's a pollen allergy." Suchingro's expression turned. He said, "You think that flower is that pretty?" Hearing this, I felt a little unconvinced. "It's prettier than you." Suchingro raised— "You see, I'm not allergic." After packing up, Suchingro was about to stand up. I quickly grabbed his arm and pressed him back. We were making quite a— Some people in the class I lowered my voice. "What do you do? Your face is already starting to swell." Suchingro looked at my terrified eyes and shamelessly continued to make things up. "Don't you feel your cheeks getting itchier? They're redder than before." After glancing at I hesitated a little, but class is almost over. "How about we wait until after? There are still 15 minutes left." Suchingro stared at me calmly. "Do you want to walk out of here looking like a pig?" Fine, I was convinced. I started packing my bag. "I'll pack my things and then let the class monitor." As soon as I finished, Suchingro had already stood up. Under the curious gazes of our class, he walked expressionlessly toward the class. He bent down and said a few words to him. I couldn't stop him at all. I just watched as the class glanced in my direction, then nodded. Suchingro also turned to look at him, gesturing an okay sign. Then he walked out. I knew he was waiting for me outside so I quickly sped up packing my bag. Soon, I left under the gaze of everyone. When we got to the I followed behind Suchingro. As soon as we walked in, Xiao Yi "What kind of allergy is this?" Suchingro answered, "Seems like a pollen allergy." Xiao Yi shook his head firmly. "Nonsense. Pollen allergies don't look like this." Suchingro shot him a sharp look. His expression was unreadable. I felt humiliated in it, but then I thought rebellious. Why should I be afraid of Suching? So I straightened my back and said to Xiao Yi, "Spicy." The first word was clear, but the second was so soft I quietly added, "I just had one bite." I even spit it out. Fine, I was afraid he'd tell my parents because my parents know I'm allergic to spice. Since I already admitted it, I might as well just go all in. "I still have some ointment left. Can I use this instead?" I unzipped my backpack, took out the ointment, and placed it on the counter. Suchingro shot me another glance. His lips tightened, but he didn't say anything else. He looked back at Xiao Yi the ingredients list and told me to come. He carefully examined my face, then nodded. It's okay. I'll prescribe you. Your face is so... It looks like it's not just one type of allergy. I suggest you get an allergy test done at a hospital when you... Getting addicted to spicy snacks, huh? Xiao Yi teased with a laugh, then turned to prepare. I sneaked a glance at Su Qingro and found that he was looking at me too, his eyes unfriendly. After the ointment was ready, Su Qingro returned to his usual demeanor. But Xiao Yi still didn't let it. She slowly asked, did you already know you're allergic to spicy snacks? Though phrased as her tone was more like a... I was terrified, afraid she'd impulsively report it to my parents. So I softened my tone and said, was I wrong? Su Qingro didn't expect me to admit fault. He smiled, then ruffled my hair almost habitually. It's good that you know you're wrong. Go wash your face. I'll take you home. What a sweet talker. I pouted and gave him a strange look. You're clearly going the same way home. Just hearing home made my shoulders slump. I looked pitifully at Su Qingro standing at... Can you please not tell my parents? Su Qingro chuckled softly. He crossed his arm and leaned against the doorframe. Your face looks allergic even from 10 meters away. No, I know that already. I can't hide it from Mom. It's the reason for the... She's already mad at me because of my grades. If she finds out I secretly ate spicy and ended up looking like... I didn't finish my sentence. I looked at Su Qingro. She seemed to be thinking and didn't say anything. I quickly added, if you don't tell her, I can give you money. I upped the stakes. Do I look like a gangster? Or someone desperate for money? Su Qingro seemed both amused and... I realized she was... So I changed tack. Then I'll treat you to a meal. Afraid he'd say something. Do I look like I'm starved? I quickly added, I'll owe you a favor. If you ever need something, I'll do my best to help. Su Qingro blinked, though she seemed a bit tempted. I suddenly regretted it a little, wondering if I'd said too much. So I quickly added, it has to be something that doesn't break the law, violate personal ethics, or force me into something too unreasonable. You've got quite the conditions. Su Qingro smirked faintly. I mumbled quietly, it's not like you'd ask me to kill or burn some. Let's go. Handed me a mask she'd just bought outside. For our pollen-allergic classmate John. After school, Su Qingro walked home with me. Sure enough, when Mom saw my red face, not even the... She immediately started scolding. Dad stepped in to stop her, and Su Qingro calmly said, Yichin, what happened to your face? I didn't dare to speak, so I glanced at Su Qingro. Su Qingro explained, when I brought him to the office, he smelled a bouquet and then had a pollen allergy. She even made up the name of a flower I'd never heard. Anyway, Su Qingro looked so composed, and her words sounded so convincing, that even I started to believe. Then, Su Qingro handed over them and explained the dosage and usage precautions to my dad noted everything. I felt like a baby who couldn't speak yet, quietly staying in the background as they took care of me. Suddenly, my mom interrupted, looking at me. Don't you have a mouth? How did I usually teach you? My dad gave her a push. Slightly. What are you saying? Look at the state he's in. I was already used to standing silently, but I felt a little embarrassed in front of Su Qingro. At that moment, Su Qingro spoke up. Uncle, Auntie, this is mainly my fault. Yichin was only guiding me and that's why he came along. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had. With an outsider present, my mom stopped, even holding back her scolding for the time being. After chatting for a while, my dad accompanied me to wash my face. My mom saw Su Qingro out. The next day, I went to school wearing a mask. I didn't take it off during class. In those days, my mom's heart softened about and she gradually calmed, but she sternly said, next time, you must make it into the... Otherwise, I'll hire a tutor. Friday came again. Lu Yu came over with a few amusement park tickets. He asked if I wanted... Without even looking up from my chemistry equation, no. I need to get back into the top 100. Otherwise, my mom will hire a tutor. After saying that, I glanced around. I motioned for him to come. Lowering my voice, I said, ask your goddess. Lu Yu grinned and chuckled, holding his face, but he's afraid it'll be too awkward with... So he asked me to bring a few... I knew it. This guy wouldn't invite me for no reason. So I said to him, aren't you afraid I'll feel awkward? Just then, Su Qingro came back. Lu Yu quickly moved aside to make... Standing in the aisle, he continued, you won't feel awkward. Hearing this, the corners of Su Qingro's and an amusing idea seemed to flash through. She suddenly straightened up and looked at me.